My name is Jessica Bennett, and I'm 26 years old. Growing up, I never knew my grandfather Marcus, a self-made billionaire. My mother Charlotte cut ties with over family issues she refused to discuss. When his unexpected email arrived asking to attend my brother Ethan's wedding, I had no idea it would tear our family apart before ultimately healing wounds decades in the making. Mom's reaction? Pure rage that culminated in her slapping me across the face and seating her own father by the trash bins at the reception. Before I dive into this emotional roller coaster, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever had to choose between family loyalty and what you knew was right. Trust me, what happened after my mother's public meltdown changed all our lives forever. Growing up in our middle-class neighborhood in Boston, I never thought there was anything particularly unusual about my family. We lived in a modest three-bedroom colonial that my mother Charlotte worked hard to afford as a real estate agent. It was just the three of us, Mom, my older brother Ethan, and me. Mom raised us single-handedly after my father passed away when I was just a baby. Ethan was 4 at the time, so neither of us really remembered Dad. We only knew him from the carefully arranged photos Mom kept on our mantle. But there were other photos I discovered while rummaging through storage boxes in our attic when I was around 12. Family pictures with edges clearly cut, removing someone who should have been there. When I asked Mom about the missing person in those photos, her expression would harden instantly. "That's your grandfather," she'd say tersely. "Marcus Bennett. We don't talk about him." And that was that. Any further questions would be met with stony silence or an abrupt change of subject. I learned quickly not to push. But that didn't stop my curiosity. Especially when I began to understand that my mysterious grandfather wasn't just some ordinary estranged relative. By the time I was in high school, occasional internet searches revealed Marcus Bennett was something of a legend in the tech industry. He had started a software company in the early 1980s that evolved into a cybersecurity giant. His estimated net worth fluctuated between $3 and $5 billion, depending on stock prices. There he was in Forbes and Fortune, in sleek suits at industry conferences, shaking hands with presidents and prime ministers. Meanwhile, we clipped coupons and I worked part-time at a coffee shop to save for college. The disconnect was jarring. Whenever Grandpa Marcus appeared in the news, which was fairly often given his status, Mom would either quickly change the channel or fold the newspaper with unusual aggression. Once, when a documentary about self-made tech billionaires featured him prominently, she left the room entirely, slamming the door behind her. "Mom has her reasons," Ethan would always say, defending her reaction. Some things are better left in the past. Ethan was always the peacekeeper, the one who aligned himself completely with Mom's perspective. 3 years older than me, he had seemingly absorbed our mother's bitterness without questioning it. He never showed the slightest curiosity about the grandfather we'd never met. I was different. Maybe it was because I'd always been the family rebel in small ways, choosing art school instead of a practical business degree, dyeing my hair purple for my 21st birthday, dating guys Mom deemed too artsy or unreliable. Or maybe I just couldn't reconcile the distinguished-looking man in those news articles with whatever villain lived in my mother's memory. So I followed his career secretly over the years. I knew when he sold his company for billions, when he started his charitable foundation focusing on educational access for underprivileged kids, when he funded a major cancer research center after his second wife died of leukemia. None of this aligned with the monster I had imagined based on my mother's visceral reactions. After graduating with my degree in graphic design, I moved into an apartment with my college roommate Rachel in downtown Boston. I landed a decent job at a marketing firm, designing websites and brand packages for local businesses. It wasn't glamorous, but I was making enough to cover my student loans and still have some independence. Life was ordinary but good. Ethan had done the expected thing: business school, corporate job, engagement to Amber, a pediatric nurse he'd met at a friend's barbecue 2 years ago. They were planning a June wedding at a country club in the suburbs, and despite the significant expense, Mom was thrilled. Amber came from a good family, had a stable career, and most importantly, made Ethan happy. She was also sweet and down-to-earth, which made her easy to welcome as my future sister-in-law. Wedding planning had consumed our family dynamics for months. As the maid of honor, I was constantly being summoned to cake tastings, dress fittings, and lengthy discussions about floral arrangements. I didn't mind, though. Seeing my serious, straight-laced brother so obviously in love made all the wedding minutiae worthwhile. I had no idea that the perfect facade of our family was about to crack wide open, all because of an email that arrived on an otherwise unremarkable Tuesday morning in April, just 2 months before Ethan and Amber's big day. I was at my desk, wrestling with a particularly challenging logo design for a client who couldn't decide what they wanted, when the notification popped up in the corner of my screen. The sender name immediately caught my attention: Lawrence Mills, assistant to Marcus Bennett. My heart skipped a beat. For a moment, I thought it might be spam, some phishing attempt using a billionaire's name to lure in unsuspecting victims. But the email address looked legitimate, from the official domain of the Bennett Foundation. I stared at the unopened message for nearly 5 minutes, cursor hovering over it, before I finally clicked. The contents were formal but surprisingly personal. Dear Ms. Bennett, I hope this message finds you well. I am reaching out on behalf of your grandfather, Marcus Bennett, who has expressed a desire to reconnect with his family. Mr. Bennett has followed your career progression with interest and pride from afar, and has asked me to inquire whether you might be open to communication. Mr. Bennett recently became aware of your brother Ethan's upcoming wedding through a mutual business associate and would very much like to attend if welcome. He understands there is significant family history to overcome but hopes that such a joyous occasion might provide an opportunity for reconciliation. If you are amenable to discussing this possibility, Mr. Bennett would be honored to meet with you at your convenience. Respectfully, Lawrence Mills, Chief Personal Assistant to Marcus Bennett. I read the email 3 times, my hands trembling slightly. My mysterious billionaire grandfather had been following my career with interest? What career? I was a junior designer at a small marketing firm. And how did he even know about me at all if he and Mom had been estranged for decades? My mind was spinning with questions when Rachel popped by my cubicle during lunch break and immediately noticed my distraction. You look like you've seen a ghost, she remarked, perching on the edge of my desk. Everything okay? I turned my monitor toward her wordlessly. Rachel knew all about my family's strange situation. She'd been my roommate through 4 years of college and had witnessed firsthand my mother's reactions whenever Marcus Bennett came up in conversation. Holy shit, Rachel whispered after reading the email. Are you going to reply? I don't know, I admitted. Mom would completely lose it if she found out I was in contact with him. But aren't you curious? I mean, he's your grandfather. And he's making the first move here. Of course I'm curious. But Ethan's wedding is supposed to be this perfect day that Mom's been planning forever. If I bring this up now. Rachel shrugged. Maybe don't tell your mom right away. Meet with him first, see what he's like. Then decide if it's even worth bringing up before the wedding. It was terrible advice from a family dynamics perspective. Secretly meeting my estranged billionaire grandfather behind my mother's back was a recipe for disaster. But it was exactly what I wanted to hear. I replied to the email that evening, suggesting a coffee meeting the following week at a quiet cafe in a neighborhood where I was unlikely to run into anyone I knew. The response came quickly: Mr. Bennett would be delighted to meet me. The next Wednesday, I called in sick to work and spent an embarrassing amount of time deciding what to wear to meet a billionaire who was also my grandfather. I settled on business casual. Dark jeans and a blouse that didn't scream struggling young professional too loudly. I arrived at the cafe 20 minutes early, my stomach in knots. But Marcus Bennett was already there, sitting alone at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee. I recognized him immediately from photos, though he was older now, in his mid-70s, with a full head of silver hair and remarkably few wrinkles for his age. He wore a simple gray suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, but no flashy accessories that screamed wealth. When our eyes met, he stood, somewhat stiffly. Up close, I could see the family resemblance. We had the same blue eyes, the same slight dimple in our left cheek. Jessica, he said, his voice warm but uncertain. Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would. I wasn't sure either, I admitted, taking the seat across from him. The first few minutes were awkward, filled with small talk about the weather and whether I'd had trouble finding the place. Then we fell into an uncomfortable silence as we both seemed to realize simultaneously the enormity of what we were doing. I suppose you have questions, he finally said, his hands wrapped around his untouched coffee cup. About 1,000,000, I replied with a nervous laugh. But maybe start with why now? After all these years? Marcus sighed deeply, looking suddenly every bit his age. I've tried before, Jessica. Many times over the years. But your mother. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Charlotte has her reasons for keeping me at a distance. Some valid, some perhaps colored by her perspective as a child who didn't understand adult complexities. He explained how he'd built his business during the 1980s, working 16-hour days while trying to support a young family. How my grandmother had grown increasingly resentful of his absence, eventually leaving him and taking Charlotte, then only 8 years old. How the divorce had been bitter, with his ex-wife painting him as an abandoning father despite his financial support. I missed school plays and birthdays because I was building something I thought would give my family security, he explained. By the time I realized what I was sacrificing, the damage was done. Your grandmother moved across the country, limiting my visits. By the time Charlotte was a teenager, she'd decided I'd chosen money over her. No matter what I did after that, I couldn't change her mind. According to Marcus, he'd tried to reconnect with my mother multiple times, when she graduated high school, when she married my father, when Ethan and I were born. Each time, she'd rejected his overtures. The last time he'd reached out was after my father died, offering financial support for the young widow and her children. Mom had returned his check, torn into pieces. I respected her wishes to keep my distance, he said. But I never stopped caring. I've followed your lives from afar, your accomplishments, your challenges. I have a file of newspaper clippings from when you won that regional art competition in high school. I saw your work displayed at your college's graduate showcase. I was there, in the back row, but left before the reception to avoid upsetting Charlotte. The revelation that he'd been present in my life, albeit at a distance, was overwhelming. I felt tears threatening and blinked them back. Why didn't you try harder? I asked, the question coming out more accusatory than I'd intended. Perhaps I should have, he acknowledged. But each rejection was painful. And I told myself I was respecting Charlotte's autonomy by not forcing my presence in her life. He paused. That may have been wisdom, or it may have been cowardice. Probably some of both. Before I left, Marcus gave me a small velvet box containing a delicate silver bracelet with a small sapphire charm. It belonged to my mother, your great-grandmother, he explained. I'd like you to have it, regardless of what you decide about the wedding invitation. I slipped it into my purse, promising nothing but to think about everything he'd said. On the train ride home, I felt the weight of competing loyalties. My mother, who had raised us single-handedly, versus this distinguished stranger who shared my blood and seemed genuinely regretful about the past. I didn't know who was right or wrong in their decades-old conflict, but I was beginning to understand that family history is rarely as simple as the stories we tell ourselves. The weekend before the wedding, our family gathered for a final planning dinner at Mom's house. The dining room table was covered with seating charts, place cards, and lists of last-minute details. Amber was reviewing the photographer's shot list while Ethan and Mom discussed transportation logistics for elderly relatives. I sat quietly, picking at my lasagna, the secret of my meeting with Marcus weighing heavily on me. The silver bracelet was hidden in my jewelry box at home, but I could almost feel it burning a hole in my conscience. Jessica, did you confirm the final fitting for your dress is on Tuesday? Mom asked, not looking up from her checklist. Yes, all set, I replied automatically. And you picked up the bridesmaids' gifts? They're wrapped and ready. Good, Mom nodded, making a check mark on her paper. I think we're in good shape then. Just one more week and my boy will be married to this beautiful girl. She reached over to squeeze Amber's hand affectionately. The normalcy of the moment, the happiness radiating from my mother's face as she looked at her future daughter-in-law, it made what I needed to say even harder. But I couldn't keep this secret any longer, not with the wedding so close. "Mom," I started, my voice coming out shakier than I intended. "There's something I need to tell you all." Something in my tone caused all three of them to look up. Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly, he knew me well enough to sense when I was about to say something controversial. "What is it, honey?" Mom asked, her smile fading slightly. I took a deep breath. "I received an email from Grandpa Marcus a couple weeks ago." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees instantly. Mom's face froze, her fork suspended midway to her mouth. "He knows about the wedding," I continued quickly. "He reached out because he wants to attend. To reconnect with us, with all of us." "Absolutely not," Mom snapped, setting her fork down with a clatter. "I can't believe you'd even bring this up. You know how I feel about that man." "Do I?" I challenged gently. "You've never actually told us what happened, Mom." "Just that we don't talk about him." Mom's face flushed red. "He abandoned us. He chose his precious company over his family. He missed every important moment of my childhood because he was too busy becoming a billionaire. I met with him, Mom." The words hung in the air for a moment before the explosion came. "You what?" My mother half rose from her chair, hands flat on the table. "Behind my back? How dare you?" Ethan immediately jumped in. "Jessica, what were you thinking? You know how Mom feels about him." "I was thinking that he's our grandfather and he's reaching out after all these years," I said, trying to keep my voice calm despite my racing heart. "Don't you think that deserves at least a conversation?" "No, it doesn't," Mom spat. "Not after what he did. Not after he chose to miss my graduation, my wedding, the birth of my children." "He says he tried to be there for those things," I interrupted. "He says you rejected his attempts to reconnect." "Of course he would say that." Mom was fully standing now, her napkin crumpled in her fist. "He's rewriting history to make himself the victim. He abandoned me when I was 8 years old, Jessica." 8. Do you have any idea what that does to a child? Amber was looking increasingly uncomfortable, her eyes darting between my mother and me like she was watching a tennis match from hell. "I'm just saying maybe there are two sides to this story," I persisted. "He seems genuinely remorseful, Mom. He's been following our lives from a distance. He even attended my college art showcase." "Stop it!" Mom shouted, her voice cracking. "I can't believe you would betray me like this. After everything I've done for you, sacrificed for you." "It's not a betrayal to want to know my own grandfather," I insisted, my own temper rising now. "He's family too." "He is not family." Mom slammed her hand on the table, making the glasses jump. "Family doesn't abandon you when you need them most." Ethan moved to Mom's side, placing a supportive hand on her shoulder. "Jessica, you need to drop this. The wedding is next week. This isn't the time to dredge up ancient history." "When is the time, then?" I challenged. "We've been avoiding this my entire life. Maybe a family celebration is exactly the right time to try healing old wounds." "There will be no healing," Mom said, her voice suddenly cold and controlled. "That man is not welcome at my son's wedding. End of discussion." "Shouldn't that be Ethan and Amber's decision?" I asked, looking at my brother. "It's their wedding, after all." Ethan's face hardened. "Don't drag us into your rebellion, Jess. You know how much this day means to Mom. I don't want some stranger who happens to share our DNA ruining it." "He's not some stranger, he's our grandfather. Don't you even want to meet him once before judging him?" "I trust Mom's judgment," Ethan said firmly. "And right now, you're causing drama for no reason except to be contrary, as usual." His words stung, but I pressed on. "He's flying 6 hours just to see us, to try to make amends. Doesn't that count for something? My mother advanced toward me, her face contorted with a rage I'd never seen before. You invited him already? Without discussing it with any of us? I told him I would try. The slap came out of nowhere, the crack of her palm against my cheek echoing in the sudden silence of the dining room. My hand flew to my face, more in shock than pain. My mother had never hit me before, not once in 26 years. Mom. Amber gasped, finally breaking her silence. My mother seemed as stunned as I was, staring at her hand like it belonged to someone else. But she didn't apologize. If you bring that man to my son's wedding, she said, her voice trembling, you are no longer welcome in this family. That is my final word. Tears stinging my eyes, I grabbed my purse and fled the house, ignoring Amber's calls for me to wait. In my car, I broke down completely, sobbing against the steering wheel before finally calling Rachel. She slapped me, I choked out when she answered. My own mother slapped me for wanting to know my grandfather. Oh my God, Jess. Come home right now. We'll open wine and figure this out. Later that night, curled up on our sofa with a glass of Merlot, Rachel said what I'd been afraid to acknowledge. You know you have to invite him now, right? Your mom literally slapped you over this. There's clearly something major she's not telling you. If I invite him, she might never speak to me again, I said, rubbing my still tender cheek. Maybe. Or maybe this is the push everyone needs to finally deal with whatever happened all those years ago. I sent the email to Marcus the next morning, confirming he was welcome at the wedding, at least by one member of the family. His response was almost immediate, he would be there. The final week before Ethan and Amber's wedding unfolded in a frigid atmosphere of strained politeness. Mom wasn't speaking to me beyond essential wedding coordination. Ethan was clearly angry but trying to keep the peace for Amber's sake. Amber herself seemed torn, offering sympathetic glances when no one was looking but not openly defying my mother's position. I was still part of the bridal party, still maid of honor, but the role felt hollow now. The night of the bachelorette party, which I'd spent months planning, the other bridesmaids picked up on the tension immediately. Did something happen between you and Charlotte? Amber's cousin Melissa whispered while we were waiting for our dinner reservation. She barely looked at you during the rehearsal today. Family disagreement, I said vaguely. We'll work it out. But I wasn't sure we would. I'd received daily texts from Ethan, alternating between guilting me, Mom cried herself to sleep last night, and angry demands, just tell him not to come, Jess. This is my wedding day, not your family therapy session. I held firm, though my resolve wavered each time I imagined the potential disaster of Marcus showing up uninvited in my mother's eyes. I'd exchanged several more emails with my grandfather, confirming details and warning him about the reception he might face. I understand the risks, he wrote. But I've missed too many family milestones already. I'd rather face Charlotte's anger than miss another one, especially when you've been brave enough to extend the invitation. The rehearsal dinner the night before the wedding was a masterclass in tension. We gathered at an upscale Italian restaurant, the bride and groom's families intermingling awkwardly as everyone sensed something was off with the Bennett clan. Mom had seated me at the far end of the table, away from the immediate family circle, a clear message about my current status. During dessert, Ethan cornered me near the restrooms. Last chance, Jess, he said, his voice low. Tell the old man not to come. Mom's a wreck. She's so stressed she's not even enjoying any of this. I can't do that, Ethan. He's already in town. He flew all this way. I don't care if he flew from Mars. This is my wedding day. Mine and Amber's. Not some family reunion you orchestrated. I felt my temper flaring. This isn't about me being difficult. This is about decades of secrets and lies that have kept us from knowing our own grandfather. Don't you even want to know the truth? The truth is our mother raised us single-handedly after Dad died, Ethan hissed. She worked 60-hour weeks to put food on our table while her billionaire father did nothing to help. That's all the truth I need. That's not the whole story, I insisted. There's more to it than that. If you'd just meet him. I don't want to meet him. Not tomorrow, not ever. And if he shows up, I'm holding you personally responsible for whatever happens. With that, he stormed back to the table, plastering on a fake smile for Amber's parents that didn't reach his eyes. After the dinner, I met Marcus at his hotel for a drink. He'd booked a modest suite rather than the presidential accommodation I'd half expected. He looked tired from travel but determined. Are you sure about tomorrow? I asked after updating him on the family tension. It's going to be uncomfortable at best, openly hostile at worst. I've faced hostile corporate takeovers and board rebellions, he said with a wry smile. I think I can handle one wedding. He showed me the gift he'd brought for Ethan and Amber, a small but exquisite piece of art by a renowned glass sculptor, along with a card containing a check I accidentally glimpsed with far more zeros than I'd expected. Is that too much? He asked, noticing my expression. I don't want to seem like I'm buying their affection. Maybe the card could just contain your well wishes for now, I suggested gently. The sculpture is perfect though. The morning of the wedding arrived bright and clear. I helped Amber get ready in the bridal suite, zipping her into her gown while the other bridesmaids flitted about with makeup brushes and hair tools. Despite everything, I found myself enjoying the role of supportive maid of honor. I'm sorry about all this drama, I told her quietly while adjusting her veil. This should be about you and Ethan, not my family issues. Amber squeezed my hand. Families are complicated. I just wish your mom could see how much this means to you. The ceremony itself was beautiful, Ethan tearing up as Amber walked down the aisle, their personally written vows, the perfect June weather as they said I do in the country club's rose garden. I stood dutifully in my bridesmaid's dress, sneaking glances at the guests. Marcus had positioned himself in the back row, elegant in a tailored suit, watching with dignity and a hint of sadness in his eyes. Mom, in the front row, never turned around, though I knew she'd been informed of his presence by the suddenly tense set of her shoulders. It was at the reception that everything truly fell apart. As the wedding coordinator directed guests to their tables, I scanned the seating chart for Marcus's name. When I couldn't find it, I approached the coordinator. There should be a Marcus Bennett on your list, I said. He's my grandfather. She checked her tablet. Yes, here he is. Table 28. I frowned. Where's table 28? The main tables only went up to 25 from what I'd seen. The coordinator pointed toward a far corner of the reception hall, near the swinging doors that led to the kitchen. Table 28 turned out to be a small round table partially hidden behind a decorative screen, directly adjacent to where the catering staff were placing empty trays and, most appallingly, next to the large bins where dishes were being scraped before washing. My heart sank as I saw Marcus already seated there alone, looking out of place but maintaining his dignity even as servers bustled past him with garbage. There's been a mistake, I told the coordinator. My grandfather shouldn't be seated here. She looked uncomfortable. I'm sorry, but the mother of the groom made some last-minute changes to the seating chart this morning. She was very specific about Mr. Bennett's placement. Anger boiled up inside me. This was beyond petty, it was deliberately cruel. I found Marcus attempting to make conversation with a confused busboy who was emptying a tray of food scraps into one of the bins. I am so sorry about this, I said, mortified. My mother. It's all right, Jessica, he said calmly. I've had business dinners in war zones. This is actually quite comfortable by comparison. His attempt at humor couldn't quite mask the hurt in his eyes. I spotted an empty chair at table 12, where some of Amber's more distant relatives were seated. Come with me. You're not sitting here. I led him across the reception hall, feeling my mother's eyes boring into my back as we passed the head table. I introduced Marcus as my grandfather to the slightly confused but polite occupants of table 12, who welcomed him warmly. I had just turned to head back to the bridal party table when my mother intercepted me, her face tight with controlled fury. What do you think you're doing? She hissed. Treating my grandfather with basic human dignity, I replied, keeping my voice low. Seating him by the trash, Mom? Really? I told you he wasn't welcome here. How dare you parade him around like some honored guest? He is an honored guest. He's family, whether you like it or not. Our voices were rising now, drawing attention from nearby tables. Ethan appeared at Mom's side, his expression thunderous beneath his forced smile. Both of you need to calm down, he muttered through clenched teeth. People are staring. Tell your sister to remove that man from my son's wedding, Mom demanded. He flew 6 hours to be here, I protested. He just wants to see his grandchildren get married. What kind of person treats their own father like garbage? That's when Mom slapped me for the second time, harder than before, the crack audible even over the background music. A collective gasp went up from the guests who witnessed it. Charlotte. Marcus's voice cut through the shocked silence as he approached our group. Despite being in his 70s, he stood straight and commanding. That's enough. My mother whirled on him, years of pent-up rage finally finding its target. You don't tell me what's enough. You lost that right decades ago when you chose your precious company over your own daughter. Mom, please, Ethan pleaded, looking around at the staring guests in horror. Not here. But Marcus remained calm in the face of her fury. Charlotte, I understand your anger. I've deserved it for many years. But don't punish Jessica for trying to heal this family. If anyone should leave, it's me. Damn right you should leave. Mom spat. Marcus nodded sadly. I apologize for disrupting your son's wedding day. That was never my intention. He turned to Ethan. Congratulations, young man. Your bride is lovely, and I wish you both every happiness. He placed the elegantly wrapped sculpture on the nearest table and turned to go, but I caught his arm. No, don't leave. Please. The moment hung suspended until a new voice joined the confrontation. For heaven's sake, Charlotte Bennett, is this how you treat your father? The speaker was Amber's grandmother, Eleanor, a formidable woman in her 80s who walked with a cane but commanded attention without raising her voice. You don't understand, my mother began. What I understand, Eleanor interrupted firmly, is that a man his age has traveled 6 hours to attend his grandson's wedding, and you've seated him next to the garbage and struck your daughter for showing him simple kindness. Whatever grievances you have could surely wait for another day. My mother seemed momentarily speechless, and used to being chastised in public. Amber appeared beside Ethan, concern written across her face as she took in the scene. Eleanor's right, she said softly. Mr. Bennett, please stay. As far as I'm concerned, you're welcome at our wedding. Mom looked betrayed, but with both the bride and the grandmother of the bride against her, she had little choice but to retreat, pulling Ethan with her back to the head table. The crisis temporarily diffused, the reception continued, though the undercurrent of tension remained palpable. Marcus returned to table 12, where he was joined by Amber's parents, who, perhaps out of politeness or curiosity, made a point of engaging him in conversation. I didn't know it then, but that public confrontation was about to trigger an even more dramatic revelation, one that would fundamentally reshape our understanding of our family history forever. The Maple Hill Country Club had been transformed for Ethan and Amber's reception. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over ivory linens and centerpieces of blush roses and hydrangeas. A string quartet played softly near the dance floor, where the newlyweds had just completed their first dance to polite applause. Under normal circumstances, it would have been a picture-perfect wedding celebration. But the undercurrent of tension from our family confrontation had created a strange atmosphere. Guests were whispering, casting curious glances between my mother at the head table and Marcus, who was now deep in conversation with Amber's father about their shared interest in vintage cars. I was helping Amber bustle her gown for the reception when she squeezed my hand sympathetically. Are you okay? Your cheek is still red. I touched my face absently. I'll be fine. I'm just sorry this is happening during your wedding. Don't apologize, she said firmly. I actually think your grandfather seems lovely. He was so gracious during that awful scene. He is, I agreed. I just wish Mom could see that. When we returned to the reception, I noticed my mother had been drinking heavily, her movements becoming slightly less coordinated as she made conversation with Amber's mother. Ethan kept glancing nervously between her and Marcus, clearly anticipating further disaster. I was chatting with one of the bridesmaids when I noticed a surprising development. Amber's parents had invited Marcus to join them at their table, moving him from his exile at table 12 to a position of honor near the wedding party. My mother's face darkened when she noticed, but with Amber's parents being the ones who'd extended the invitation, she couldn't openly object. About an hour into the reception, after dinner had been served and the cake cut, I saw Ethan approach Marcus's table. My heart jumped into my throat. Was this going to be another confrontation? But to my surprise, Ethan's posture wasn't aggressive. He seemed hesitant, curious even. Marcus stood to shake his hand, and though Ethan's response was stiff, he didn't pull away. I couldn't hear their conversation, but I watched as Marcus removed something from his pocket, what appeared to be a small photo album. He opened it, showing something to Ethan, whose expression changed from guarded politeness to genuine interest. My mother had also noticed the interaction. She set down her wine glass with excessive force and made her way across the room, her trajectory slightly unsteady. I moved quickly to intercept her. "Mom, please don't make another scene. Let Ethan talk to him if he wants to." "He's showing him pictures," she said accusingly. "What pictures? What lies is he telling my son?" Before I could stop her, she'd reached their table. But instead of another angry outburst, she froze when she saw what Marcus was showing Ethan, old photographs spread across the table. "Where did you get those?" she demanded, her voice unsteady. "I've kept them all these years, Charlotte," Marcus replied quietly. "Every school photo you sent before you stopped. Every newspaper clipping. Every program from every school play and recital, even when your mother returned my letters and told me I wasn't welcome." Ethan was holding a faded photograph, staring at it with a furrowed brow. "Mom, this is you, with Grandpa. You're sitting on his shoulders at what looks like a carnival. You look happy." "I was a child," she snapped. "I didn't know any better." "Charlotte," Marcus said gently, "perhaps we could discuss this privately? For the sake of your son's wedding day?" Something in his tone, not confrontational but almost pleading, seemed to penetrate my mother's anger. Or perhaps it was seeing the old photographs, tangible evidence of a relationship she'd spent decades denying. "Fine," she said curtly. "The bridal suite is empty now." The four of us, Mom, Marcus, Ethan, and I, slipped away from the reception to the privacy of the suite where Amber had prepared for the ceremony. The room still smelled of perfume and hairspray, discarded makeup wipes and bobby pins scattered across the vanity. As soon as the door closed behind us, Marcus placed the small photo album on a side table. "I never stopped loving you, Charlotte. Or trying to be part of your life," he said without preamble. "You abandoned us," she shot back, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. "You chose your business over your family. You missed every important moment of my life." "I tried to be there," he insisted. "For your high school graduation, your college commencement, your wedding. Each time, your mother told me I wasn't welcome. She returned my letters, my gifts, my child support checks." "That's a lie," Mom said, but uncertainty had crept into her voice. "Mom said you never sent anything after the divorce except the court-mandated minimum. That you never tried to visit." Marcus reached into his suit jacket and withdrew an envelope, looking suddenly much older and more tired. "I was hoping it wouldn't come to this," he said quietly. "I didn't want to tarnish your memories of your mother. But you deserve to know the truth." He opened the envelope and carefully removed its contents, yellowed envelopes with "Return to Sender" stamped across them. Birthday cards with uncashed checks still inside. Photographs with date stamps from school events, my mother's high school graduation, her college move-in day, showing Marcus in the background, clearly present but keeping his distance. Most damning of all was a letter from my grandmother, dated a year after the divorce, explicitly telling Marcus to stay away. "Your presence only upsets Charlotte," the letter read. "She's finally adjusting to life without you constantly disappointing her. If you truly love your daughter, you'll respect my wishes and stop trying to see her. The money you send goes into her college fund, but she doesn't need to know it comes from you." My mother's hands trembled as she read the letter in her mother's unmistakable handwriting. She sank into a nearby chair, the color draining from her face. "Mom said you never tried," she whispered. "All these years, she said you just forgot about us once you had your new life, your new family." "I never forgot," Marcus said softly. "Not for a single day." "But why didn't you try harder?" she demanded, tears forming in her eyes. "Why didn't you fight for me?" Marcus looked down at his hands. "I thought I was respecting your wishes, what I believed were your wishes. Your mother convinced me you wanted nothing to do with me. By the time I realized she might have been filtering the truth, you were an adult with your own life. And then when I did reach out directly, you rejected me so completely that I thought perhaps your mother had been right all along." Ethan had been unusually quiet, examining the photographs and letters with growing confusion. "So our grandmother lied? For decades?" "I believe she thought she was protecting Charlotte," Marcus said carefully. "The divorce was bitter, and I did work too much during the marriage. In her eyes, I had failed as a husband and father, and she wanted to shield her daughter from further disappointment." My mother was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face as she looked through the photos and letters, physical evidence of a narrative completely contrary to the one she'd believed her entire life. "All this time," she murmured. "All these years of hating you. Of thinking you didn't care enough to even try." There was a gentle knock at the door, and Amber peeked in hesitantly. "Is everything okay? People are asking where the bride and groom's families disappeared to." Ethan went to her, speaking softly. Amber nodded, then entered the room fully, closing the door behind her. "I think," she said carefully, "that perhaps this is a conversation that needs to happen. The reception can wait a little longer." And so, in the midst of what should have been their wedding celebration, my brother and his new wife sat with us as decades of misunderstanding and pain began to unravel. Mom shared her memories of abandonment, the birthdays when she waited for calls that never came, because, we now realized, her mother had intercepted them. Marcus described the school events he'd attended anonymously, sitting in the back, leaving before the end to avoid confrontation with my grandmother. "I have a box," he said at one point, "with every school photo, every newspaper clipping I could find about you or your children. I knew when Jessica won her art competition in high school. I donated anonymously to Ethan's business school. I followed your real estate career, Charlotte. I've been proud of you every day of your life, even when you wanted nothing to do with me." The realization that my grandmother, a woman who had died when I was too young to really know her, had orchestrated this decades-long estrangement was difficult to process. Even harder was watching my proud, stubborn mother come to terms with the fact that her entire understanding of her childhood had been built on a carefully constructed lie. "I don't know how to feel about this," Mom finally said, wiping her eyes. "I'm not sure I can just forget a lifetime of anger in one afternoon." "I'm not asking you to," Marcus replied gently. "I'm just asking for a chance to know my daughter and my grandchildren before it's too late. I'm 76 years old, Charlotte. I don't have endless time left." A strange quiet fell over the room as the weight of those words sank in. It was Amber who finally broke the silence, standing and smoothing her wedding gown. "I think," she said with a small smile, "that there's a reception full of people wondering where we all are. And perhaps," she looked at my mother and Marcus, "this might be a good time for a father-daughter dance that's been delayed for far too long." We returned to the reception separately to avoid drawing attention. My mother disappeared briefly to repair her makeup, while Ethan and Amber made the rounds greeting guests as if nothing unusual had happened. I escorted Marcus back to his table, where Amber's parents welcomed him warmly. "Everything all right?" Amber's father asked with genuine concern. "I think it might be, eventually," Marcus replied with cautious optimism. The reception continued with the traditional activities, toasts, cake cutting, bouquet toss, but there was a palpable shift in the atmosphere. My mother remained at the head table, more subdued now, occasionally glancing toward Marcus with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. It wasn't the hatred of earlier, but rather something more complex, confusion, perhaps, or the beginning stages of grief for a relationship she'd never had the chance to experience. After the formal dances were completed, I noticed Ethan approach Marcus's table again. This time, their conversation seemed more relaxed, with Ethan even laughing at something my grandfather said. It was surreal watching my brother, who just hours earlier had wanted nothing to do with Marcus, now engaged in what appeared to be a genuine conversation. Even more surprising was when Ethan led Marcus over to where Amber's extended family was gathered, making proper introductions. "This is my grandfather, Marcus Bennett," I overheard him say, the words clearly new and strange in his mouth. Marcus handled the attention with gracious humility, deflecting questions about his business success to focus on his pride in his grandson's achievements. When Amber's young cousins discovered he'd once met their favorite pop star at a charity event, his popularity at the wedding rose considerably. I was watching this transformation from the edge of the dance floor when I felt a presence beside me. My mother, looking drained but somehow lighter, stood watching the same scene. "He seems good with people," she said quietly. "He is," I agreed, hardly daring to breathe lest I break this fragile moment. "He has your smile, you know. Or I guess you have his." She didn't respond to that, but she didn't walk away either. We stood in silence for a moment before she spoke again. "I don't know if I can forgive him yet. Or Mom. Or maybe even myself for never questioning the story I was told." "You don't have to figure it all out tonight," I offered. "It's a lot to process." "Yes," she agreed. Then, after a pause, "I shouldn't have slapped you. Twice. That was. I've never done anything like that before." It wasn't quite an apology, but I recognized it was the best she could manage in the moment. "I know, Mom." The band began playing a slower song, and I saw Marcus look in our direction. After a moment's hesitation, he crossed the dance floor toward us. My mother tensed beside me. "Charlotte," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "I wonder if you might consider dancing with your old father. For the sake of appearances, if nothing else?" I held my breath, certain she would refuse. But after a long moment, my mother gave a small nod. "For appearances," she agreed. I watched, along with half the wedding guests, as Marcus led my mother onto the dance floor. They didn't speak as they moved awkwardly to the music, decades of estrangement evident in the careful distance they maintained even while dancing. But they were there, together, my 76-year-old grandfather and my 54-year-old mother, attempting something that had seemed impossible just hours earlier. Ethan appeared at my side, his expression unreadable as he watched our mother and grandfather. "You were right," he said simply. "There was more to the story." "I just wanted to know him," I replied. "I never expected all of this. None of us did." He sighed heavily. "I kept thinking about what you said, about how we never questioned Mom's version of events. Why didn't we ever just ask? Or look him up ourselves?" "I did look him up," I admitted. But I never had the courage to reach out until he made the first move. The song ended, and my mother and Marcus separated immediately, the moment of connection over. But something had changed, a tiny crack in the wall of resentment that had defined our family for generations. As the reception began winding down, Marcus approached me to say his goodbyes. "I should go," he said. "I've caused enough disruption for one wedding." "You didn't disrupt anything," I assured him. "You helped expose a truth that needed to come out eventually." He smiled sadly. "Truth is rarely comfortable in the moment, though hopefully healing in the long run." He glanced toward my mother, who was speaking with Amber's parents. "Do you think there's any chance she'll want to continue a relationship?" "I honestly don't know," I said. "But at least now it's her choice based on the real story, not a fiction she was fed her entire life." He nodded, then surprised me by pulling me into a gentle hug. "Thank you, Jessica. For being brave enough to seek the truth. Not many would have had that courage in the face of such family opposition." As he turned to leave, my mother approached, her expression guarded but no longer hostile. "You're welcome to come to brunch tomorrow," she said stiffly. "At my house. If you want. The immediate family will be there before Ethan and Amber leave for their honeymoon." It wasn't exactly a warm invitation, but it was an invitation nonetheless. Marcus accepted with simple gratitude, and I felt something like hope flicker to life as I watched them exchange phone numbers, a surreal sight after everything that had transpired. Later, as the last guests were departing, Amber found me collecting discarded centerpieces to save for her return from the honeymoon. "So," she said with a tired smile, "not exactly the wedding day I imagined, but definitely memorable." "I'm still so sorry about all the drama," I began, but she waved it away. "Are you kidding? My cousins are beside themselves that they met Marcus Bennett. Apparently he's some kind of big deal in the tech world," she teased. "But seriously, Jessica, I think what happened today was important. Hard and messy, but important." She hugged me tightly before adding, "Besides, any family that can begin healing a 50-year rift at a wedding reception has to be pretty special, right? I'd say I married into the right kind of crazy." As I drove home that night, exhausted but strangely at peace, I reflected on how dramatically our family landscape had shifted in a single day. The grandfather we'd never known was suddenly real and present. My mother's lifelong narrative had been upended. My brother had gone from angry opposition to cautious acceptance. And I, somehow, had been the catalyst for it all, not by trying to cause trouble, as they'd initially accused me, but simply by being willing to question the story we'd all accepted without evidence. By being open to the possibility that there might be another side to a history I'd only ever heard from one perspective. The reconciliation had only just begun, and there would undoubtedly be difficult conversations ahead. But for the first time it seemed possible that our fractured family might actually have a chance at becoming whole. 2 months after Ethan and Amber's wedding, our family gathered for Sunday dinner at my mother's house. This had become our new tradition, a weekly meal where the 5 of us, Mom, Marcus, Ethan, Amber, and I, came together to slowly rebuild relationships that had been damaged or non-existent for decades. The first few dinners had been awkward affairs, with conversation stilted and carefully neutral. My mother and Marcus navigated around each other like wary cats, relying on Amber's cheerful chatter and my occasional prompts to fill uncomfortable silences. Ethan, ever the pragmatist, focused on safe topics like sports and weather. But gradually, as the weeks passed, something remarkable began to happen. The frozen politeness began to thaw into moments of genuine connection. Marcus brought old photo albums, sharing pictures of my mother as a baby that she'd never seen. Mom tentatively began asking questions about her early childhood, memories she'd either suppressed or never formed. "Did I really have a phase where I only ate yellow foods?" she asked during our third dinner, responding to one of Marcus's stories. "For nearly 6 months," he confirmed with a laugh. "Your mother was at her wit's end trying to find yellow vegetables you'd accept." These small exchanges, glimpses into a shared history that had been denied to both of them, slowly built bridges across the chasm of absence. It wasn't all smooth sailing, of course. There were heated moments when my mother's resentment bubbled to the surface, usually triggered by some innocent comment about a milestone Marcus had missed. "You weren't there when I learned to drive," she said bitterly during one particularly tense dinner. "Or when I got my first apartment. Or when I was terrified about becoming a mother myself." "You're right," Marcus acknowledged, neither defensive nor dismissive of her pain. "I wasn't there for those moments. And no explanation can change that fact or heal that wound completely. I can only be here now, if you'll let me." His consistent acknowledgement of her feelings, without excuses or counterattacks, gradually seemed to drain some of the poison from my mother's decades-old wound. She didn't forgive easily, that wasn't her nature, but she began to make room for a more complex understanding of the past. For his part, Marcus was unfailingly patient but never passive. He attended every Sunday dinner without fail, even flying back early from business trips to ensure he wouldn't miss one. He remembered details from previous conversations, followed up on stories, brought thoughtful gifts that demonstrated he was paying attention to our lives now. 6 weeks after the wedding, he surprised me with an opportunity that would change the trajectory of my career. The Bennett Foundation was looking for a new creative director to oversee their brand identity and communications. The position would mean a substantial salary increase, creative freedom, and the chance to work on meaningful projects aligned with the foundation's educational mission. No pressure, he assured me when he presented the job description. If you're happy where you are, I understand completely. And if you're interested but concerned about nepotism, I can recuse myself entirely from the hiring process. I was torn. The opportunity was incredible, but I worried about how my mother would react. To my surprise, when I brought it up at the next family dinner, she was supportive. "You'd be a fool to turn it down," she said pragmatically. "Besides, the foundation does good work. You'd be using your talent for something worthwhile." I accepted the position the following week, and the transition felt like stepping into a role I'd been unknowingly preparing for my entire career. Working with Marcus, I gained insight into not just the business acumen that had made him successful, but the deeply held values that drove his philanthropy, values I was surprised to discover I shared. As summer transitioned into early fall, Marcus invited us all to his beach house on Cape Cod for Labor Day weekend. I expected my mother to decline, but to everyone's surprise, she agreed. The weekend wasn't without its awkward moments, but watching my 76-year-old grandfather teaching my 30-year-old brother to sail in the same waters where he'd once taught his daughter created a sense of generational healing that felt almost tangible. One evening, as I sat on the deck watching the sunset, my mother joined me, wrapping a light cardigan around her shoulders against the ocean breeze. "Thank you," she said simply, gazing out at the darkening water. "For what?" "For not giving up. For pushing us all to face the truth, even when it was easier to keep our distance." "I just wanted to know him," I said. "I never imagined all of this would happen." She was quiet for a moment. "I've spent most of my life being angry at a villain who didn't exist. I was so certain of my story that I never questioned it, never allowed for the possibility that there might be another side." She shook her head. "What a waste." "It wasn't a waste," I countered gently. "You raised us, built a successful career, created a good life. And now you have a chance to know your father in the time he has left. That's not nothing." She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "I keep thinking about my mother, your grandmother. I loved her so much, Jessica. She was my rock, my protector. Discovering that she deliberately kept me from having a relationship with my father. I'm still trying to reconcile those two realities." "People do misguided things out of love sometimes," I suggested. "Maybe in her mind, she was protecting you from disappointment." "Perhaps," my mother conceded. "Or perhaps she was punishing him for the failure of their marriage by using me as a weapon." I'll never know her true motivations now. We sat in companionable silence until Marcus emerged from the house, hesitating when he saw us together. "Don't let me interrupt," he said, turning to go back inside. "Stay," my mother said, surprising both of us. "Please." He settled into a chair beside her, and the three of us watched as the last sliver of sun disappeared below the horizon, casting brilliant oranges and purples across the sky. No one spoke, but for the first time, the silence between us felt peaceful rather than strained. By Christmas, the transformation in our family dynamic was remarkable. The holiday gathering at my mother's house, once a small, somewhat melancholy affair with just the three of us, had expanded to include not only Amber but Marcus and, to everyone's surprise, his longtime housekeeper Lucia and her teenage son, whom Marcus had been quietly putting through college. My mother had decorated more elaborately than usual, digging out ornaments that had been packed away for years. I noticed Marcus examining one, a crude clay star I'd made in kindergarten, with particular tenderness. "Charlotte made one just like this," he said quietly. "It used to hang on our tree every year." Instead of the awkwardness such comments had initially provoked, my mother simply nodded. "I think I remember that. Didn't it have gold glitter that shed everywhere?" "All over the living room," Marcus confirmed with a smile. "Your mother was still finding glitter in July." These small shared memories were the building blocks of their newly forming relationship, neither the idealized father-daughter bond that might have been nor the villainous abandonment my mother had long believed, but something new and real, built on the complicated truth of their shared past. After dinner, as we gathered in the living room for coffee and dessert, Marcus shared his latest project. He'd purchased land just outside Boston and was developing plans for what he called a family compound, separate homes built around a shared central courtyard and pool. One for Charlotte, one for Ethan and Amber, one for Jessica, and a guest house for when I visit from California, he explained, spreading architectural drawings across the coffee table. If you're interested, of course. No pressure. The old Charlotte would have rejected the idea immediately as an attempt to buy our affection or control our lives. But the woman who studied those plans that Christmas evening was someone who had learned that family relationships were both more complicated and more precious than she had once believed. It's a beautiful design, she said thoughtfully. Though I'd want my garden on the south side to get proper sunlight. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. It was an opening, a willingness to consider a future where our once fractured family might live in closer proximity, both physically and emotionally. As the evening wound down, I found myself reflecting on the extraordinary journey we'd embarked on just 6 months earlier. What had begun with an unexpected email and culminated in the dramatic confrontation at Ethan's wedding had evolved into something I'd never dared hope for, a real family, complete with the complications and reconciliations that make such connections meaningful. The healing wasn't complete, and perhaps it never would be entirely. Some wounds leave scars that change us permanently. But in choosing to face the truth rather than cling to comfortable fictions, we had each found a path towards something authentic and potentially lasting. As I watched my mother and grandfather poring over those architectural plans, their heads bent together in concentration, I understood that courage sometimes means questioning the stories we've been told, even when those questions disrupt our most fundamental assumptions about who we are and where we came from. My mother looked up and caught me watching them. She smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes in a way I hadn't seen in years. And in that moment, I knew that whatever challenges still lay ahead for our family, we would face them together, with a hard-won appreciation for the truth in all its messy, complicated glory. So, what would you do if you discovered a family story you'd believed your entire life was actually false? Would you have the courage to seek reconciliation, even if it meant appending decades of certainty? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story of family healing resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more true stories of reconciliation and second chances. Remember, it's never too late to heal old wounds and create new beginnings. Thank you for being part of our journey, and may your own family find peace and truth, however complicated it may be.